Good afternoon. Welcome to those here in our library and those zooming in. I'm Cy Adler, Interim Dean of the College of Urban and Public Affairs. And this is another in our series of panel discussions inspired by the 50th anniversary of the Portland Downtown Plan. So it's great to have people here in our remodeled library. It's still a work in progress. We need stuff on the wall and in the cabinets, but it's happening. I'd like to give my thanks to Dean's Office staff that are producing these events. Kaya Mendoza, Erin Sutherland, Sarah Villante, and Jonathan Wolf, and especially Sarah for her work overseeing the transformation of the library. It's my pleasure to introduce the moderator for today's panel, a distinguished graduate of our Master of Urban and Regional Planning program, who is now Associate Vice President at Portland State for Planning, Construction, and Real Estate. So, in the downtown plan, Portland State University is designated an urban university, a university that is in and of its place. And of course, there's nothing more direct than the Portland State campus as a key element in downtown Portland. So this is a really interesting and critically important discussion about a key way in which the university is in and of its place. Jason will introduce panel members. They'll be giving your presentations. Panel members will talk amongst themselves, and then we will be reaching out for questions. Jason.
All right, thanks, Cy. And yeah, good afternoon, everyone. So we're really happy to be here. So as a moderator, I'm not going to say much, but I will say that it's been my pleasure to get to know folks on the panel. So that's one of the great things here about these discussions is getting to work with great folks here on campus and in a little more detail. So that's been great. And also, as Cy indicated, kind of the ability to sort of dive back into the history of the downtown plan and 72 plan and what that says about our campus today and what it says about us going in the future. So we're going to start with some presentations by each of the panel members, and then we'll open it up for discussion after that. So I will introduce each of them quickly, and then we'll get right to it. So yeah, just going down the row here. So Ellen Shoshkes is an architect and planner based in Portland. In campus planning and the work that we do, Liz and I do, we've worked a lot with Ellen. She does a lot of placemaking here on campus. And I also get to know people a little bit more through the bio. I didn't actually know that Ellen actually worked in New Jersey on some national school design competitions, was a senior urban designer in the New Jersey Office of State Planning, and has a PhD in urban planning from Rutgers and a master's in architecture from MIT. Next, Leila Siwang is an assistant professor in the School of Architecture, where she teaches urban design and architectural history courses. She's a registered architect in New York State, and her scholarship uses infrastructure as a lens through which to investigate urban environmental relationships. Next, Anna Goodman is an assistant professor in the PSU School of Architecture. Her work focuses on the politics of architectural practice and the intersection between design, education, and social movements. Her most recent project examines the concept of citizen architect and the ways in which architectural educators have influenced welfare policy and practice through the 20th century humanitarian design-build projects. Next, Dr. C.N. Corbin studies relationships between society and nature within the built environment by investigating the concept of the green city with the United States. as an environmentalist, urban political ecologist, and environmental justice scholar, her work focuses on public green spaces and how urban sustainable development initiatives, environmental policies, and practices impact and shape land uses and public park access. Jeff Schnabel is PSU School of Architecture professor, currently on sabbatical. Does investigations on making better places after dark. He's co-founder of the Portland Winter Light Festival, which is a fantastic event. If you haven't been, he's a member of the Nighttime Design Organization and Media Architecture Institute. And finally, last but not least, is Hoekstra. He is Assistant Director of Campus Planning in the Planning and Sustainability Office here at PSU. Manages long-range planning, site plans, community placemaking projects at PSU, on the PSU campus. So you'll hear more about the projects she's been doing. Previously, she worked at Toulan and San Luis Obispo, and has a master's in city and regional planning from Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. So, all right, with that, we're not ready to go. I'm sensing.
I have technical difficulties.
Uh-oh.
I think that there we go. I have to log back into the meeting
All right.
somehow.
I believe the panel that the person that's moderating is in charge of keeping us all
I just have to
entertained.
fill in.
Yeah,
Yes,
you're-
there was once actually, so I used to be in the chapter president for the Oregon Planning Association here, and I was organizing a conference. It was actually a legal issues conference that we have every year here in Portland, and go through planning topics that have to deal with, well, legal issues and recent court cases and that. But we had one of the sessions all lined up, and then it snowed, and our presenter was down valley and couldn't get up, and so she called me like that night and said, "I can't make it," and I'm like, "Well, you're like one of the key speakers here," and so she's like, "Well, I'm doing it on this, the book that you have, so you could just, flip through that and say some things." I'm like, okay. And so I did. So I like flipped through her book and basically presented her thing with, less than 12 hours between like what she told me, and I had to pull this off. So yes, I had to tap dance on that occasion, but on this one, I'm not really prepared to. I had a little more time on that occasion to actually talk about it. Maybe as we're getting going, though, we can do a little preview maybe of what's coming up, and maybe start off with Jeff, kind of the stuff that you've been working on in sabbatical, and kind of some of your observations you've seen there, and then we can see where that goes.
I like the way you threw it right back at me.
Yeah,
That was well played. As alluded to in my brief bio, I'm very interested in design after dark. I really kind of feel like all the conditions fit, not only physically change, but transportation changes, food availability changes, even the way in which we hear sound at night changes dramatically. But it seemed like we as designers, I know personally, and for those around me, that we were largely looking at the world as if it was always just a daytime condition. And so it seemed like we were missing an awful lot of opportunities, but an awful lot of realities of what it means to design cities or campuses if we aren't paying attention to a 24-hour clock. Particularly, there's a book that sabbatical is great because you get to read books that have been sitting on a pile waiting to get read. And there's and I've forgotten the author's name already, but there's a great book that talks about how our time is our last frontier, and so evenings are our last frontier, and that we're going into that frontier in a big way. And a good example of that is like up at OHSU, they're doing more and more shift work. More and more people are working late at OHSU because it's less expensive to have an operating suite run 24 hours than it is to build new operating suites. And so what does that mean in terms of transportation? What does that mean in terms of healthy food for those people that are working in those places? So that's a long-winded way of saying kind of what I'm starting to investigate in my sabbatical.
Great. Right, please, yeah. So as we're getting Ellen back up online, and it was unfortunate because Ellen was going next, and she is actually responsible sort of for the framework, talking about the history and how all that comes together. But while we're waiting for that, maybe Anna can, well, we're trying one more thing here.
All right.
So Anna's going to try to load it on that computer, but part of the, I think some of the questions that are going to come up, at least I hope will come up here, and sort of preface that, sort of start backwards from this, is, you know, we're going to talk, Ellen's going to talk about the 72 plan and kind of what that,
Historical perspective.
yeah, the historical perspective and how that really is kind of where we are today. But as we were talking about this and having this discussion and prepping for this meeting, it became clear that that time in history is almost repeating itself in some ways now as we come out of the pandemic and we see what's going on around downtown right now with vacancy rates that are unprecedented in office perspective, and you know, official numbers I think are around 30% or something like that, but I think it's probably closer to 50% or more of vacancy here in downtown. And so it becomes interesting then what is PSU within that in the downtown, you know, how do we serve as a catalyst to help bring downtown back? And that you're going to hear a lot about what Ellen is going to say about the role of the urban serving university, you know, in a downtown at that time, and back in the late 60s, early 70s, that was struggling greatly. And so we find ourselves, I think, in a similar situation. So are we good to go?
Thank you.
All right, so it's half that enough.
Thank you.
All right.
Okay,
Good.
well, as Susan just said, I'm going to frame our panel discussion with this historical perspective on the co-evolution of PSU, both as an institution and as a place in downtown Portland. And this story begins in 1952, when the Portland State Extension Center moved from Vanport to the former Lincoln High School. And the school grew very quickly. And in 1955, the state upgraded its status to a four-year college, renaming it Portland State College. So PSC was chartered as a downtown city college, not of a campus type, and limited to offering general ed courses to commuter students. But concurrently, the Mayor's Advisory Committee on Urban Renewal had identified 84 acres for redevelopment just east of the Portland State site and south of the old municipal auditorium. And they saw this as the ideal site for a new expo center or a coliseum to anchor downtown. And they wanted to take advantage of new federal legislation enabling urban renewal to stimulate business and the growth of the city. Because Portland's economy was in decline and downtown had been stagnant since the end of the post-war boom in 1948. Carl Abbott, who I rely on heavily for this history, wrote that now the city was beginning to seek revitalization and a new identity in the post-war world. Well, significantly, a 1956 plan for the redevelopment of the South Auditorium site envisioned an expanded campus for Portland State as part of this strategy for redefining and revitalizing downtown. And the federal government agreed to designate the area for urban renewal since the city certified it was blighted, but the Coliseum was moved to a site on the other side of the river. So the newly established Portland Development Commission hired Skidmore, Owens, and Merrill, SOM, to consult on a new development program. And oddly, this 1958 redevelopment plan doesn't show Portland State at all, even on the Lincoln High School site. However, that same year, the state authorized a plan for the growth of the Portland State curriculum and extended the campus boundaries by 3 blocks to allow for site acquisition and clearance of the 2025 block area. Well, by 1960, the student union was nearly 5,000 and the campus included 2 new classroom buildings, the library, student union, and 5 buildings that were repurposed as offices and classrooms. SOM was hired to prepare a phased development plan for the campus based on program requirements for 20,000 students. In 1962, the state approved this major expansion plan and subsequently authorized Portland State to offer master's degrees. A further outgrowth of the SOM plan was application for federal urban renewal funds for acquisition and clearance of the properties in the newly defined 25 block campus area. So in 1965, the Portland Development Commission designated the Portland State Urban Renewal District and also extended the boundaries of the South Auditorium Urban Renewal District. PDC commissioners strongly advised Portland State that planning for the school should blend with the planning for the South Auditorium renewal area. And PDC chairman Ira Keller stated, "We cannot support the Portland State project unless it's close to the style to which the commission has become accustomed." So by 1965, the process of redefining the function of Portland State and downtown Portland and who they would serve was inextricably connected. Consultants for the 1966 master plan, many of whom had worked for SOM, responded to this advice with a brutalist architectural vision, and the plan notably featured a pedestrian sky bridge system linking the east and west portions of the campus. In 1969, Portland State gained university status and established 3 doctoral degrees, including one in urban studies, meriting such a well-appointed campus, but delays in funding prevented its full realization. Moreover, the master plan didn't include any student housing, which was denied to PSU by the state legislature, despite continuing growth in enrollment and loss of affordable housing due to urban renewal. Many students lived in dilapidated downtown apartment buildings and faced dislocation. This led a group of student activists to form Portland Student Services, Inc., a nonprofit student-run housing organization. They acquired temporary use of 9 vacated apartment buildings within the campus for student housing. Significantly, this group grew out of an urban studies class, the College Housing Project, from spring term 1969, exemplifying the student activism and tactical urbanism of this era. PSU students were part of a wider grassroots movement to contain urban renewal, joining neighborhood groups like the Riverfront for the People Committee. As Carl Abbott has observed, it was the growing university, along with the expanding electronics industry, that attracted outsiders with new ideas to Portland and gave rise to this new generation of civic activism focusing on conserving the downtown and inner city neighborhoods. Students and faculty were also using public spaces on campus as sites for activism, notably during the student strike to protest the Vietnam War in May 1970. The police riot that ensued threatened the June opening of Keller Fountain, the jewel and the crown of the open space sequence designed by Lawrence Halpern for the South Auditorium project. He famously insisted on proceeding with the dedication ceremony, saying, "As you play in this garden, please try to remember we're all in this together." The 1972 downtown plan grew out of these community concerns, including disinvestment in the downtown and lack of public involvement in urban renewal. A citizens advisory committee drafted the goals for this plan, which contained several key features that continue to guide policy toward more transit-based, pedestrian-oriented development today. The 1972 plan also notably designated PSU as an urban university, not only as an institution, but as a place, a special planning district anchoring this new vision of downtown. This represented a culmination of the urban renewal project, integrating planning for a dynamic campus in downtown, each evolving in response to changing understandings of their function and purpose. The South Park Blocks Urban Renewal Project, which also began in 1972, and permanently close the area around PSU to vehicular traffic exemplifies how urban renewal fostered the integration of the campus in downtown. An update of the campus plan in 1979 emphasized the continuing integration of the campus and the city, consistent with PSU's new view of itself as a metropolitan university, serving minorities and other non-traditional students who otherwise wouldn't have access to higher ed. A major theme of the 1979 plan was the vacation of streets and the development of pedestrian areas. In this, excuse me. Excuse me. Swallow. Everything is going wrong today. This had to be coordinated with work that had just begun on the city's first comprehensive plan. Then in 1985, the state directed PSU to become a comprehensive research university. PSU's new mission prompted another update of the campus plan in 1986. The 1986 plan expanded campus boundaries and recommended formation of a university district to establish design standards and coordinate with the new Central City Plan, which, when it adopted in 1988, included this recommendation. As PSU president, Judith Romali spearheaded the formulation of the planning concepts for the university district based on her vision of PSU as an urban grant university serving the city and the region. The Governor's Commission on Higher Ed embraced this theme and called for creation of a university district to stimulate the development and redevelopment of the Central City. Significantly, a graduate student planning workshop, winter and spring terms in 1991 and 1992, produced the initial planning concepts for the formal university district plan. PSU officials embraced their ideas, and the facilities department published them to serve as the basis for public discussion. The vision document contained the first public mention of the idea of creating an urban plaza between 5th and 6th Avenues on Montgomery Street to serve as a public space and transit hub for the region. These concepts were formally adopted as policies in the 1995 update of the Central City Plan, and the urban center complex and plaza were completed in the year 2000. The same year as the University District Plan, which was completed as part of a larger citywide planning initiative, it extended PSU's potential growth area while opposing additional design criteria. Likewise, PSU's 2010 Framework Plan was formed in the context of citywide collaboration on the most recent update of the Central City Plan. The adopted plan envisions a combined South Downtown University District as the setting for a growing international multicultural center of learning, fostering information exchange and innovation. I ask my students to consider this whole area as an expanded university district innovation zone, a place for students to test new ideas for making public spaces more welcoming, inclusive, and livable. And that is my.
All right, thank you, Alan. So yeah, great framework in which the rest of the discussion will flow now. So thanks for the history and that. It's always great to hear kind of how we got to this place, right? And what that means. And so the remainder of the panelists then will begin to talk about as we're moving forward, what does this mean as PSU the campus, and how does design take us in different directions perhaps, and how does it respond to what we're currently seeing in the downtown. So Anna.
Hi, everyone. No, I shouldn't. Hi, everyone. I'm really happy to have the opportunity to build on Ellen's presentation, to talk a little bit about work I've been doing with students over the last 4 to 5 years that's trying to think about how social movements and campus design intersect more generally, and then specifically on our campus. So this is a curiosity that began during the pandemic when we were all ousted from our campus, but it was also a moment where social movements, protests in downtown and in the rest of the city became very, very apparent in the city. And we were all thinking about it and having it on our mind. And so I worked with students to look at universities across the world. And here you just see 3 examples. To think about how social movements had happened in different places, in particular student protest movements that were the outgrowth of, in some cases, pro-democracy movements, anti-fascist movements, or in the case of places like Morgan State University, which is an HBCU, longer trajectories of civil rights movements in their cities and regions. And really thinking about how to map and to represent the way those social movements actually inflected the campus design in a lot of ways similar to what Ellen mentioned at PSU. And so as I have continued to work and we've come back to campus, we've become really curious about our own campus at PSU and how we can start to think about it through a number of different lenses. So there is so much really fascinating work that's done at the planning and urban design level. So really looking at us as a system, as a district. But I actually sent my students out on the campus to do field work and to really talk about how all the different spaces that they occupied on campus were being used. What were they observing in those spaces, and giving them some critical lenses in terms of looking at trauma-informed design, indigenous design principles, and others, to really start to think experientially about what this campus was really meaning to them on the ground. And so while we were doing this, we were doing a series of studios that were thinking about some of the current projects that I think Liz is going to talk about soon. So the science building, one that's being transformed into the Vernier Science Center, the Oak Savannah project that Layla is going to talk about, and then the interstitial space that also stitched together all these projects in West Campus, and how we could bring some of these critical frameworks that are inspired by contemporary social movements, but that as of yet don't fully inflect our planning documents as they currently stand today. And so we looked at some of the sites in West Campus, and then we also looked at the opportunities that are going to be created by empty a lot of the dumpsters around campus are actually going to be removed, and the opportunities that we could have in terms of a dispersed strategy. And so just to show how the students were building on that, we looked at a series of strategies of mapping the campus that really focused on these critical lenses, and also on counter storytelling and counter designing. So really looking at, from a student perspective and from a diverse student perspective, what were the kinds of environments that these students really wanted to see and which they saw were missing from our current camping planning documents. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Anna. So Corbin's up next, talk a little bit more about open space and what that means, and particularly in the context of the campus.
Great, thank you so much. When we say our motto, let knowledge serve the city, many of us, those of us who are situated or positioned as experts, we see it in one directional. Experts serving community members with the aim of making Portland a better place. With this, something important is ignored or lost: the co-production of space, place, and knowledges. Portland's community members and residents, who are informal mentors and teachers to our students, don't tend to get recognized. As much as PSU is a public institution, that word and definition of public is a precarious one. Nicholas Blomley, I believe that's how you say his name, paper, Enclosure, Common Right and Property of the Poor from 2008 provides a way to understand public and private space, and that private property gives a right to exclude and public property provides a right to not be excluded. Our urban campus has an interesting urban entanglement implemented and has grown since that plan of 1970. These city and campus entanglements blur jurisdictional lines, boundaries, and obscure ownership of space, both real and imagined. The park blocks are one of the interesting urban and campus entanglements that is called PSU's front yard. Yet it is owned by the city of Portland and managed by Portland Parks and Recreation. This means it's open dawn to dusk, 5 a.m. to 9 p.m. as a park space. Yet the sidewalks and the streets, transportation infrastructure that allow you to move through this space are open 24 hours, unless activities are taking place without permission. With the understanding that the permission is usually delivered, when you do get it, through a permitting process in which paperwork and money is exchanged for specific use, a type of temporary privatization with permissions to exclude and opportunities to commodify and modify public space for private purposes. We see this in PSU's farmers market, in which the public park for recreation becomes a lively market of fresh produce, music, and people gathering to purchase and exchange using money. In essence, commodifying and monetizing space while also providing a service to PSUs, surrounding communities, and beyond, which is a beneficial use of this. But private and public relationship is a precarious one. These blurred jurisdictional boundaries can create a real and imagined connection to space and can convey a type of belonging to it. Students often learn about this precarious relationship between private and public space through the right to assemble and exercise free speech, protesting. To quote Martin Luther King, "A riot is the language of the unheard." And what is that America has failed to hear? It has failed to hear that the plight of the neighbor poor, it has worsened over the last few years. It has failed to hear the promises of freedom and justice have not been met. This sentiment can be transferred to student protests of the 1970s who were protesting the Vietnam War. Students, faculty, and community members got an education in these blurred jurisdictional boundaries bounded up by in precarity of public and private space. On May 11th, during the PSU strike in 1970, which has been deemed a year of confrontation, what was fashioned to be the headquarters of these protesters, the park blocks, turned from a peaceful protest and became violent because their permit for the campout in the park had expired. And law enforcement cleared the park by force. And this is to say, 4 years later, the city permanently closed the streets around PSU's park blocks to traffic in the same spots where students placed their barricades. I'll end with this understanding of education, right? So we learn education from books, but we also learn education from actually being in the space and navigating these spaces. Education, again, can take places in many forms. And when we look back at the 1970s, and while we contemplate the 2020 protests in connection to Floyd's murder, what has changed? And how do we think through these blurred jurisdictional boundaries as PSU integrates and co-produces its city, as well as the city co-produces PSU? So I'll leave it there.
All right, thanks, Corbin. So Leila's up next. You need,
I-
yeah, you want to
I'll
drive?
switch Mail on. I'll switch Mail on.
All right.
That sounds good.
All right, Leila's going to talk about some discussions that have happened at PSU around some of these very topics that we've already begun discussing here.
Thank you, Jason, and thanks, Corbin and Ellen and Anna. I'm going to use two computers here. I thought we would have presenter mode, but I'm not going to attempt that today, given everything that's happened so far. Yeah, so I wanted to speak a little bit about a conversation series that I organized partly out of discussions with a group of us who had been I guess we were calling ourselves the Urban Design Initiative, and seeing where that a collaboration between architecture and planning and real estate could take us. And we went into COVID, and with the help of Patty Tillett, I organized a conversation series to take place to kind of position PSU as a campus remotely, I guess you would say, during the COVID years. It happened in spring 2021, and with the gracious support of Jeff Schnabel, who was at the time our director, and helped support this with time and money. I organized a conversation series to further the efforts of the Urban Design Collaborative, bringing together practitioners with city officials and academics. It aimed to have a conversation about Portland, but beyond Portland. Portland had already been in the news as a poster child for just about everything. Its fall from grace, shall we say, as an urban downtown, its wildfires, its racial protests / rioting, depending on the news source, a site of civil unrest, the locus of racism and anti-racism. This conversation series invited local voices within the wider circle of urban design to speak with a non-Portlander on a topic that they found pressing as a way of learning about places and from places. So there were 7 conversations. The first conversation was housing, a conversation between local developer and state commissioner Aniele Halova and Elizabeth Timmy, then of LAMAS, a Los Angeles-based community design firm, discussing the potentials of ADUs and other housing densification strategies in the wake of Oregon's House Bill 2001 and 2003, which removed single-family zoning and ways of imagining future housing needs. Downtown invited Detroit architects, activists, and now developers Dan Patera and Melissa Dittmer to speak with urban designer Nolan Leinhart about downtown recovery. Could Portland learn anything from Detroit's turnaround? Material Flow invited Momoyo Kaijima of Atelier Bow Wow in Japan to discuss the wider environmental impacts of our timber choices and how those choices can impact regional ecosystems and communities alike, with Thomas Robinson, founder of Lever Architecture here in Portland. Memory invited Kiara Boone of the Equal Justice Initiative in Montgomery, Alabama, to speak with local Oregon Black pioneer historic preservationist Kim Moreland on the subject of how urban memory is designed, how it's chosen and narrated for publics. The conversation revolved around the design pasts and design futures. The Equal Justice Initiative is a legal institution committed to reform in and the ending of incarceration, but is also a museum and a memorial dedicated to those disproportionately affected by lynching and Jim Crow laws in the South. Oregon Black Pioneers is a volunteer organization dedicated to preserving the homes and memories of Black pioneers for the future. Technology invited Intel anthropologist and researcher Dawn Nafis to talk with Portland Smart City Open Data Coordinator Hector Dominguez about the ethics of using urban data in public space. Streets invited the City of Vancouver, BC's Lisa Parker to speak with PBOT's Art Pierce about the opportunities and limitations of street activations as a form of urban experimentation during COVID. And finally, Land invited Gabe Shoshkes, Executive Director of Friends of Tyrone Creek, to speak with Judy Bluehorse Skelton, Assistant Professor for Indigenous Nations Studies Department at PSU. By positioning land as an infrastructure in this series, the conversation sort of ended the series recognizing that the relationship humans have with land, beyond seeing land as something we belong, beyond seeing land as something that we own, rather something that we belong to. It questions how we use it as a resource and the regulations by which we've turned it into property. The conversation focused on the work undertaken by both speakers in collaboration with land trusts, conservancies, and community partners to reclaim and rematriate land, and in light of this work, what land back might mean at a larger scale. So following on from these lessons, or this lesson in particular, this term, I want to end with something that my students are working on this term. I'm building upon the Oak Savannah site, that Oak Savannah work that Anna has already mentioned. I invited, with the generous support of the Center for Public Interest Design, Kevin O'Brien, to come and workshop with 5 of our design studios. Kevin is an Australian-based architect, descendant of the Kara and Merriam people, whose work over the last 15 years has been developing a designing with country methodology that seeks to locate people in a more indigenous-centric relationship with place and with ecologies. During the workshop week, students went through several design charrettes, the last of which was a model, and we burnt them at the Oak Savannah site on campus. This term, my studio is building upon that methodology using the proposed art and design project that will be built next to the School of Architecture on campus, asking students to design ground up rather than program out, and to think about what choices the design of our buildings make for the larger ecological community, not just minimizing the impact on our ecosystem, but improving it. We're tracking sources of good wood, local foresters who avoid clear cutting and the ecological disaster it creates on the species for our water and our soil. We're looking at good mills, those who track our wood, and good recycling measures, all as a way to reframe the building as only a short-lived manifestation of a wider design process. So I will end it there.
All right.
Thank you.
All right, next up, Liz is going to talk with a little more specificity, or a little more, I guess, localized about what's been going on here at this campus and some of the placemaking and design initiatives that she's been involved in. So, all right. All right. Take it
Thank
away,
you,
Liz.
Emma, for the laptop. Thanks, Jason. Yeah, so I'm just gonna speak a little about the administrative sort of campus planning perspective. From that side of things, I work with Jason in planning, construction, and real estate. And just kind of thinking about how the campus planning process at PSU has evolved since pre and post COVID, and what projects have sort of come to light in the last couple of years, and how we're sort of building off of those new and evolving themes as we look toward the future of campus planning at PSU. Ellen actually already covered the frameworks plan, so I don't have a lot to talk about there, but this was sort of the PSU's product that responded to some of the older planning documents. The 72 downtown master plan called out a distinct university district. The 88 central city plan then called for the creation of a university district. And then the district plan was created in 95. And this frameworks plan was created in 2010 in response to amending and modifying some of the university district plan design guidelines, I believe. So this was sort of PSU's vision for what the university district could look like moving into the future. And I think something interesting about this particular document is that it focuses a lot on growth and expansion of the university, and really looks at building out and rising student populations. And now we're sort of seeing a reversal of some of those trends and having to rethink what our strategies are going to be. And then in certain ways, I think a lot of this plan's values still hold true, trying to work with the city and the surrounding community and create, the bottom graphic shows sort of this intersection between the campus and the public domain. And I think that's something that we still really value at PSU, but we're just sort of thinking through what that looks like with the downtown coming back after COVID. So some of the things that have come up for me, specifically as I've been working in this realm of campus planning and land use on campus, looking at our long-range planning strategies, are these emerging themes that came up during COVID. And I think rather than this focus on sort of expansion, like we saw in the frameworks plan, we're really focusing now on sort of adaptation and resilience, and using a lot of our existing resources to the full potential that they have, really building meaningful community spaces for people, equitable design processes, and working with the surrounding community in a way that really exemplifies true placemaking. And then working with the city, I think the cross collaboration between PSU and the city and the community is still a value that we really cherish, and I'm seeing come up over and over. So I just want to highlight 3 projects that have really grown and expanded during the last 2 years during the pandemic. And to me, I think those projects kind of exemplify a lot of these values and some of what I think the future at PSU might look like. So the first one is the skate park that popped up next to Shattuck Hall, and that's actually the site of an old tennis court that wasn't being used after construction trailers were placed there. When I came on to this position in 2019, Jason tasked me with finding a use for that space, and so I actually worked a lot with Jeff on teaching a class with some architecture students and having them really work with campus stakeholders and a lot of the surrounding buildings and a lot of students too, and just trying to think of a design for that space that would work for a lot of people on campus and really work for our students and our community. And during that process, we had a lot of students actually come to me, and a lot of students in the class bring up a skate park on campus. And so I think it was this theme that had been coming up over and over for a long time, but just wasn't able to gain traction in that process. And so a lot of the designs that the students in Jeff's class did incorporated either a space for skating or skatable elements, thinking about maybe like benches or furniture in the space that people could skate on safely, but not necessarily like a skate park in itself. So that all got dropped in 2020 because we started the pandemic and the focus for everybody totally shifted. And at that point, the skaters took over. So I think Jason like sent me a text one day and was like, "Did you see the skate park on Shattuck?" And then like shortly after that, Nick Pelster, who I want to give a shout out to, he's probably not watching, but he was the student who was really behind these efforts. He's an alum of the Art and Design College. And we've been working together for the last 2 years on that space and just making sure that the surrounding stakeholders are happy with the relationships and supporting them as they test out this pilot program. So PSU gave them permission to do a pilot there. We started at a 1-year pilot, and now we're moving until the new building goes up. So we should have another year of skating happening there. And we've gotten so much community feedback and just amazing knowledge from people using the space. There's some photos here just showing a public engagement activity that Ellen's class did, and actually Laurel Priest and Blair Valley took these photos, but Blair works with me now in the planning office, just really talking about the sense of community that this space has built. And I think it's just a really cool example of a student community-led placemaking project. It's very flexible, the ramps change all the time, it's adaptable. And I think it's been a pretty cool example of downtown revitalization. It's one of the most activated spaces on campus, unless it's raining like today, but yeah, I'm probably talking too long, but Montgomery Plaza, Ellen has worked a ton on this street, really doing placemaking and activation in the last couple of years. It started with a 2009 plan, the Montgomery Green Street plan, and then it's really gained traction throughout the pandemic. I think in 2019, we partnered with PBOT to close the street to vehicles, and this was sort of a one-off street like this in the area. And then since the pandemic happened, now there's streets like Montgomery Street all over the city, and that was really a response to having lack of outdoor space. So this street has been a really cool way to kind of pilot this concept with the city of Portland. And it's something that really took off during the pandemic, despite having a plan in place before that. So these are just some images of all of the neat things that have happened there. Jeff and Ellen both contributed to the Winter Lights Festival activations, I think 2 years in a row. We've had 3 different painting sessions, 2 different murals one with the Career Resource Center on campus, and one with Comma, that's a BIPOC artist collective. We've had tons of different music and art activations. And so it's just been a cool example, I think, of a pilot partnership with the city of Portland. Again, this downtown revitalization theme, and then a lot of community ownership in the space. So we're hoping to make this a permanent plaza next year, and it's slated to roll out with some other streets that have been closed to traffic during COVID as part of this PBOT Plaza program. And then the last one, which has been talked about quite a bit, is the Oak Savannah project. This started in 2011, actually, so this is another one that's been going on for a long time, but it's really picked up traction during COVID. And I think a lot of that appeal is a really equitable design process and a community-led public and outdoor space on campus again. It started as a partnership between campus planning, sustainability, the Student Sustainability Center, Professor Judy Bluehorse-Skelton, and Indigenous Nations Studies has been involved for like 11 years, and then PSU facilities too. To imagine this native white oak savanna and a learning garden and outdoor classroom space. And then we actually have it in PSU's 2019 open space plan. The rendering is a design that was done in 2017, I think, by two landscape architects. So they worked with stakeholders and did some design shreds on campus and really imagined what this space would look like. And then in the last couple of years during COVID, there's been a really amazing partnership between architecture and Indigenous Nations Studies to work together and create these cross-collaborative designs that are really centered in Indigenous knowledge and design principles. And so, yeah, that's something that's going on now. The circle at the bottom is a gathering circle that was recently done, part of class work. And I think, again, this one in particular is really about the equitable design process, inclusive design process. It's supposed to be a truly resilient circular ecosystem in this space that can really adapt to climate change and future situations, and hybrid flexible space again. So yeah, these are I think that's it.
All right, thanks, Liz. All right, Jeff, we start out with you. Anything else you want to add here at this point?
I won't take as much time because I did get a head start. But I will acknowledge the fact that the university district holds somewhere in the realm of 23,000 students and 7,000 employees. So if you think about it, 30,000 people can be pretty darn impactful in a positive way. One would hope, on the direction of not only this district, but the city in which that district exists. And just there's some power just to those numbers, but when you think about the range of those voices, the kind of talent, the creative skills, the knowledge that exists within those 30,000 individuals, it's a pretty exciting proposition. Which then means that as this panel goes, it gives us an opportunity to look at the district, to look at the city through a lot of different lenses. My particular lens, as I've kind of alluded to, is thinking about how time impacts our decision-making or the way in which we inhabit space. And I think it's really relevant for a campus, because a campus looks very different on a warm fall day. And all of a sudden those park blocks are full of people, the urban plaza is full of people doing what they do in those spaces. And that looks a lot different than 10 o'clock at night on a rainy Portland chilly evening. Campus is a very different place. Campus is a very different place during the summer. And I think the first thing to acknowledge is after 5 o'clock on campus and in the summer, that number of 30,000 goes down dramatically, right? So we're really big, we're really impactful for 9 months out of the year and for 8 hours out of the day. But if we start to bring in that factor of time, that changes quite a bit. If I were to kind of drive that point home, even the kind of the food offerings on campus are really related to an acknowledgement of when people are here. And so of the 25 sit-down restaurants, a place where you not only get a meal, but actually sit down and eat that meal in a place, of those roughly 25 places in this district, after 10 o'clock, only 10 p.m., only 4 of those are open. After 11 o'clock, only 1 of those is open. Those of you who enjoy the Green Tortoise know which place I'm speaking of. Those that you might have some questions about whether that really is a dining experience, but I did put it in the category of an actual dining experience in that. And so when we start to think about a place over time and what happens after things get dark, our sense of public safety changes. Sometimes the reality of public safety changes. It changes dramatically depending on who you are, what part of the city that you came from to come into this campus. So I'm fascinated by that change. And I'm really wary of offering any solutions. That might be maybe my just kind of safeguard. I think it starts with a curiosity about these things. I am so far away from offering up, if I ever do offer up any solutions to these things, but I'm definitely curious about the conditions that exist over a 24-hour period on campus. Liz has been working with groups to ask some really interesting questions about that. For our evening classes, should they be grouped together on campus or should they be dispersed to keep all of campus animated? It's a fantastic question, to which I'm really glad that Liz has to make a decision about that, not me, but I will be tuned in to kind of see how that plays out relative to how transportation changes on campus, how we use those interstitial spaces that are being created by our students and stakeholders. So I'm really excited to be able to kind of take a deeper dive into this idea of design and planning with time added as a really important component of that. And I'll just stop with that.
All right, thanks, Jeff, and thanks to all our panelists here for the presentation. So that was a great variety of perspectives about what the campus is and what downtown is and where we've been and potentially where we're going. So I'll start with a question, I guess, to open it up to the panel, and then look to the audience and online and in person here to for questions as well. But first, I want to go kind of back to the macro level and back to Ellen's historical perspective of the 72 plan and where downtown was at that point, right? In a not a particularly great place. There wasn't a lot of activity, as you pointed out, a lot of disinvestment as there was a flight to the suburbs and that was really hollowed out downtown. And now it seems to me we're potentially in a similar position here in 2022, where vacancy in downtown is I think 50+% from an office perspective. Retail vacancy is huge. And clearly downtown Portland is struggling. And so what can PSU do? What should PSU do? And what is our role in revitalization of downtown, both from a design perspective as well as a planning perspective? So Alan, I'll first to you, and then whoever on the panel wants to join you.
Well, I think that over the past, since 1950s, it's been clear that there's an expectation that PSU has a very strong role to play in the urban revitalization and redevelopment and constant changing of downtown. That's a given. And it's accepted that it's as an institution, it's institutionally its role. And I think it's exemplary that so many students have been involved over the years, many years, in projects that have actually, moved the needle, taking action when PSU administrators wouldn't, and when the state wouldn't, and other people wouldn't. And faculty also taking the initiative and identifying issues. And, you know, we're here in the Toulan school, I mean, the role that Bill had played. So it's not a question of if, it's a question of how.
To the how then, ideas about how PSU can lead moving forward for the next 10 years perhaps in downtown here as we recover from the pandemic and downtowns all over change perhaps and what their function is.
I'm gonna suck up to my dean hard here and say that one of the ways, and this is only one piece of a very complex thing, but what is it that brings people from the place in which they live and comfortably live? And if you're in a good neighborhood, pretty much everything you need is in that neighborhood. So what brings you to downtown? What is it? And I think events, I think culture, the arts. So I think the College of the Arts has a really strong role to play in that. We can include sports in that, although PSU sports, some of our biggest attractors tend to be played elsewhere, but I still think there's a role there. But there are offerings that we provide that are outside of the normal offerings that exist within your neighborhood. And I think those special moments, those cultural moments, lecture series, particularly if we don't do them on Zoom, we actually bring people down and find a way to make that meaningful. But I think events are a really important place. There's an important place for PSU and events in making downtown really vital again.
Leila, did you?
Well, I was going to actually ask Liz. Are you in conversation, or maybe Liz and Jason? Is PSU campus planning in conversation with city planning? Like, does the city ask PSU of something or have these conversations and suggest that role has changed and those needs have changed? And if so, how?
I could speak to like more specific projects, I think, on that, and then maybe Jason has some larger scale ideas, but I work with planners at the city a lot on specific initiatives. So like the Montgomery Street project, I worked directly with PBOT, and that was really a direct ask of us, like, hey, can you help us work through this pilot plaza program and sort of be a model for the city. Sitting on things like that. Yes. And then I was also going to touch on like circulation through this part of downtown as like a major way that we could look at revitalization. We're going to have the Central City in Motion improvements coming down 4th Avenue in the next couple of years, which is going to be a protected bike lane and much better pedestrian crossing and signalization. And then they're adding now to Broadway protected bike lanes like leading up to Market Street. So I think just things like that are going to allow people to have more safe alternative ways to access campus and connect with the other areas of downtown. And then same with the Green Loop project and potentially partnering with the city on maybe helping to get a piece of that done. So I think those are like specific asks that I'd say we've been involved in. I wanted to touch too, I think, Jeff, you were just saying like a sense of why do people come to campus versus stay at their houses when they have the option. And I think the slide that I had on the courts had these amazing examples of student thoughts on that project. And there were even some specific photos that were taken by Blair, who works with me, saying like the courts is the only reason I left my house today. Like the courts is why I come to campus, because it gives me a place to see my friends and be outside safely. And so I think that space was really inspiring for me to see when campus was totally dead, like just students coming back and gathering there just for that, because they felt like they had a sense of ownership in that space on campus. So I think that's a big motivator.
And it's free.
Yeah.
Yeah,
There's,
and
there's
so,
no monetary like exchange in that space. It's just a public space.
so I just like to put in a little asterisk on mine. I'm a big fan of free events.
Yes, and to that point, Corbin, I think you had some great points about the monetary exchange in the public realm, and how do you see PSU moving forward, and what's our role? You know, as a continuing place to have free events or expression, and how do we balance that role with the role of safety and security of our students, faculty, and staff here on campus?
Well, I think, just thinking about it, a lot of times when we say that we're serving the community or the community's here and we're working with them, what gets hidden is who is that community, right? And so when we think about bringing community, especially far east Portland, like how do you reach them and bring them in? That could be creating events, providing types of transportation, whether that is, incentivizing public transportation through maybe a stipend of some type to start creating that belonging and creating that connection, right? And at the same time, public, private, in these different spaces, these different jurisdictions behave in some, like I said before, many times, precarious ways. And so how do we ensure that community members that are not familiar with PSU, how do they gauge safely and feel safe? I'm wondering how much the safety issue is really about the community members coming to PSU versus the PSU faculty, staff, and students experiencing safety issues from welcoming a community. And so what does that space look like? What are we reaching out to these communities? How do we bring them in? How do we make sure that we do that over time until trust is built, in which they too see that co-production, that relationship between the city and PSU. So I think there's a lot of community development that needs to be done for sure. And then also thinking about what does particular futures look like around city centers. And I often question whether a city center versus a ring of city centers, a ring of these sort of congregational zones in which communities can meet up, that they don't have to travel so far to a particular location to take advantage or be exposed to these event opportunities or these resource opportunities or opportunities to actually create the spaces they wish to see in the world.
And you haven't a chance to chime in yet.
I have a question which is actually aimed at you and a little bit to Liz too, which is about kind of building on this conversation of who's on campus, what is our community, and I think I'm curious about what you all are thinking about housing on campus and what housing students means. And also, if you have data or observations about how our students, where they're living, how they're getting to campus has changed since the pandemic. I think we are all aware of the acute cost issues that are associated with living in this area. But also I think in the studios that I've been doing, our students are very, very interested in living and dwelling as with campus as being part of that. But they also have these intersecting identities as being parts of communities, as having other sorts of commitments that they're making in their lives. And so I'm just curious if there is a strategy for future housing on campus, or if there's an acknowledgement that people are going to be living further from campus.
Well, I'll start with a plug for Monday's session is actually on housing. So I'm going to participate in that one and talk a little bit about it. We do have a housing master plan that we created or finished just prior to the pandemic in 2019. Yeah. Which kind of took place in a much different environment than we have right now, and did look at the need for additional housing on campus, particularly focused on first-year students and that first-year experience. And in my sort of ideal world, and actually I was just asked this question, I was touring the trustee member this afternoon, and she put to me, like, you had unlimited resources, what moves would you do on campus? And one of my big ones, I think, would be to re-envision West Campus as more first and second year student housing, and really, so you have that more campus experience there. Really, it's the more pedestrian oriented part of campus. Right now, our first year experience is across in Broadway and Ondine, and that's much more urban kind of setting, right, than you are as soon as you cross over Broadway and you're that part of campus. And so I could see that as a gradual transition of the building up of the residential portion of campus on the west side there, and really looking at that as kind of those investments. And you're right, we're while we don't, the current data we haven't collected yet about where folks are at, and we do that every year, but it has been going further and further out, right? As you look at, do geocode addresses and do that map, that ring gets larger and larger every year. And certainly we're seeing too, just by in this fall, much more people driving. Like the number of parking permits is up, the number of transit passes is down. And so that also speaks to this, you know, the cost and where people are living and who can actually afford to get to campus and that. And so how do we provide that campus experience going forward is more of a, do we become more of a residential campus, right? Is that something that is in PSU's future versus this commuter campus that we currently are? Is that a way forward that we begin investing in housing here and focusing of more folks living in the University District? So that is an open question and one perhaps of our next incoming president to begin to address. But I was certainly, in my opinion, I think more housing is better, more housing in the University District. And I think as we look at downtown, what is the role of downtown? You know, is it a place for people to continue to live? What in a higher density, those people who choose to do that. So that's also a good kind of question back to the panel about how you see the university and the future of the university, design of the university moving forward. How if downtown becomes less and less of an employment destination, is there a role for more people to live here?
I'm wondering what the reciprocal relationship should be too. What is downtown's obligation to PSU? And it may exist in some meaningful ways in the form of, you know, internships and places of business and job shadowing and things like that. But I think it should be it should be a relationship. And in the case of that relationship, it's not just what PSU can do to help vitalize downtown, but in that relationship, what is downtown's responsibility to making PSU you know, a fabulous partner in all of this. Again, I don't know what that means, but I feel like that question probably needs to be asked.
Ellen.
Well, I think that was one of the features of all the energy around in the 1990s and early 2000s maybe, about this definition of what does it mean for PSU to be an urban grant university, and what does it mean to have an urban district. They were inventing it, they were defining it, they were designing it, and there was a public-private partnership and engagement from the governor on down to students. And that's something that would be very interesting to contemplate. How would you orchestrate that? And well, what were the ingredients that made it a success then? And do we have those ingredients now? What would it take to replicate or reinvent that kind of collective energy around a vision like that?
I think there's a question here from Ethan
Yeah. Okay.
that I think just builds on this and your point, Corbin, which is it says we, and I think we means campus, but I'm not sure, actually have a multi-nodal regional growth management plan created and stewarded by Metro. Downtown is one of the system centers of the region and has special status in the growth management plan. And so I think I was just thinking about your point, Corbin, and I wondered with Liz, like we do have sort of some extension spots in the city, right? That aren't downtown, for example, where some students do their capstone projects. Is that in your jurisdiction to also manage, and what do the campuses look like there?
Yeah, we don't have any, we don't own any other property
Yeah.
outside of campus, right? We have some other leases in other places, but it's partnerships.
Yeah.
And but yeah, so we're not really managing any of that space outside of essentially our downtown
Mhm.
location and what we have on the South Waterfront. And that's kind of the extent of PSU, but it's an interesting question, one that particularly now, 5 years ago was asked quite a bit, like, where else should we expand? Where else should we be, right? Should we be out in the neighborhoods more, right? I think art and design is great. KS Mocha, which is out in the King Elementary School, is a great example of that partnership, right? Is there other ways that PSU distributes itself across the city, across the region in a meaningful way? That's an interesting question, right? And what does that do to PSU downtown, and do you dilute your kind of brand, if you will, downtown, or does that help strengthen it by bringing more people in as you're in the neighborhood? So
If I can chime in really.
Yeah.
With that, I mean, when we think of all the needs that East Portland has, right? I'm wondering how the school can meet those needs. And the question that I often have and has been asked before is that, again, somebody that focuses on parks, there's a lot of destination parks downtown for tourism. And does tourism, is that more important because of the economic strength of it? Is that more important than our everyday residents that also need these infrastructures, these ideas, these solutions, especially when we're thinking about heat waves and poor smoke days and gatherings, and what does that look like in the 21st century and beyond? And how do we think through strategically, really being able to make things better in these communities versus it being very centered in a business district, in a district that is pretty much doing okay, more or less, right? Less now, considering that, which also brings me, and I'm sorry for this tangent, is how much of this is, post-COVID, how much of it is post-protest, and how much of it is new tensions and new navigations that we have to do to deal with climate change. Heat waves and smoke days together does not get a community outdoors. So what needs to be designed as far as shading? What needs to be designed as far as air filtration to maybe present arenas that of gatherings that can really weather this type of weather or these types of climate shock that we're experiencing. A lot of events got canceled during the summer, right? So what does that mean for even us being out in the city and navigating it for a good 5 to 6 months each year? There's just a lot to contemplate.
yeah. Question? Yeah.
Yeah, actually, that's a good question. Bring up so many points in so many different areas. I guess when I think about the statement, let knowledge serve the city, and what PSU has to provide the city, the second question is kind of like, how are we set up to build on strengths of relationships? So where do we want to have impact? Where can we have impact? So in the 70s and 80s, plans that have been referring to Portland State's connections to the city were deeply involved in planning, deeply involved in different parts of the city's bureaucracy and life. And I don't perceive that that's the case today, not necessarily the result of Portland State, but the result of the change in society, the change in business development downtown, social infrastructure, not-for-profit organizations moving out into broader areas, etc. So as we talk about this issue of how do we impact the city, my question is, how are we prepared to build relationships, and where would those relationships be? built based on the strengths that we have. Where do we want to have it? That'll be question number one. And question number two, as it relates to place, you guys are all experts on place, like whether it's a day or night. We're going to have less students on campus because many are choosing, for all sorts of valid reasons, to visit us online. And so the question becomes, do we want that? Or do we want to create a circumstance where the compelling vision is so substantial that we want them to be on campus? All that said, what does it mean for the questions you're dealing with, whether it's day or night? Where am I going to place students and why? Or what does that mean for campus building? No, I don't expect answers to all these questions, but I do think we have to be able to identify who our partners are in the community that we want to have relationships with, that we can impact and can impact us. I don't know how we go about it.
Well, that's
So
what-
just to repeat the question, yeah, so,
Good luck with that.
yeah. So just to perhaps to summarize, so the first one was a reflection of the past in PSU. There's been a deep connection with the city is during planning and revitalization of downtown. That connection seems to be now somewhat lacking. And how do we build that back? And who are the folks that we want to partner with, and that should partner with us, right? So how do we go forward and make those actions? So that was the first question. Second question has to do with online versus place versus in-person education, and what does it mean if we have so we do now 40+% of classes being taught online at PSU, and what does that mean for this place and the design of PSU, the future of PSU, and its place in the neighborhood? So who wants to start with the first one, like the relationship with the city?
Well, I've got a very academic perspective on just that one thing, and I think that the more that the university recognizes community service and community engagement as a legitimate form of creative and scholarly activity, the more it kind of reinforces that, so that, you know, engaging deeply with a community is equivalent to a publication, or is even more equivalent to a publication. And I think that I think the university is doing that, but I think the more they embrace that sensibility, the richer and deeper those relationships have. There's just more opportunities to do that.
I just want to point out that we are having a presidential search. You know, a lot of stuff happened under the leadership of visionary type presidents like Judith Vermelli, and for better or worse, Vim. He came in with that vision, and he tried to sell the educational urban renewal district. Right?
Yes.
So that's something to think about in terms of the next president. And the other thing is the deans took a very strong role. Didn't wait to be invited. They went out there and sold ideas. So it's top down and bottom up, because the students are doing it. Students are doing it, and faculty are doing it. It's going to be top down.
Yeah, I think there are, as you point out, a lot of classes I've been involved with in my time at PSU, and back when I was a student here, definitely getting out and being in the community is really what PSU is about, right? And sort of what you need to go to school here and to work here is that connection, right? So I would agree that that's happening, but it's very diffuse, right? And it doesn't happen in necessarily a planned way from an institutional standpoint, that happens organically through classes and through faculty who are making those connections. So I'd love to hear, as faculty here, what your thoughts are on all that. So
I also thought that somehow this idea that serving the city, if we want to serve parts of the community that are further and further away from this central idea of a campus, then it makes sense to think about how the university became slightly decentralized through these COVID years. And if we are beginning to think of multiple downtowns as a city model, then a university that has satellite locations makes a lot of sense as an educational model, as a community model, as a partnership with a different kind of city. And as someone who Yeah, the idea of the university as a business model, though, I don't know if it starts to come in, the university as an institution that might serve the city with knowledge or partnerships or communities is one thing, but it as a business model perhaps comes in conflict with that. I imagine, although I have no idea, there are a ton of reasons why PSU wants to consolidate its downtown and bring more students here as opposed to bringing the learning outside. But I imagine that becomes a whole a friction that is really hard to, as a state university, really very difficult to answer. But it does bring into play that there are multiple answers that might come in conflict with one another.
Well, it's like Liz's conundrum about concentration of activities at night versus sprinkling.
Yeah.
But just to be clear, PSU, Portland does have a city plan that has multiple centers. It's just hierarchical, and the downtown is the most central.
Right.
And is the designated regional hub too, which was Eden's
That's what
point.
it is.
But we have,
Right, so
Healthy
does the
connected
university
no,
build upon that, or does it really, it's
That's
a
up to
physical
Rex.
campus?
Yeah.
It has always been until, I guess, the COVID years. It's been a physical campus where everyone comes
Yeah,
to,
yeah.
so.
Yeah, and before, I mean, we had classes, we had online programs, but with a small portion of the total credit hours here at PSU, right? And we are not set up as an online institution, right? That is not our mission. And so you're right, as you look at from a business model, being somewhat on the business side and knowing the debt that we have to pay on the buildings and the real estate that we have here, it does come into conflict, right? If you were to try to expand that or make it diffuse, there really isn't a market to divest ourselves really in property, right? It's hard to sell big classroom buildings and downsize like a corporation can. That's a difficult way to go. And so there's billions of dollars literally of state investment here in this 50 block area. And what the future of that is, is a great question about how you move that model forward in a way that makes sense with the mission of the university. So
well, you could say that the future of PSU, I mean, there's basically existential threats to the future of PSU. It was a need for it in 1952, and it grew, and it was very much engaged with the whole urban renaissance that took place here in Portland as well as other places. And then people said, oh, well, the city is where we want to be. So now we have University of Oregon here too. We're not the only urban university. We have a competition for that.
yeah, I think Oregon State, University of Oregon, Willamette, you name it. I mean, they're all in Portland, right? And I think certainly before COVID, they were see the writing on the wall that the population center was in Portland, it was growing. And if you were in the rural areas, it's difficult to continue that, to attract people there perhaps. Now it's somewhat of a toss up. Oregon, University of Oregon, Oregon State are both bursting at the seams as residential colleges, universities, and you see that played out across the country, where these flagship universities are doing very well, continuing to do well, and regional institutions are struggling. And those who are commuter institutions are struggling, right? Those in downtowns are struggling. And so how do we begin to rethink what PSU is and to overcome this sort of existential
Well, one idea, and that's been bandied around, is closer connections to the community colleges. So, PSU can stay here and be, kind of a central thing and have these branches at the community colleges.
question here?
So,
That's a great segue. What I was thinking about is we're here at this great institutional learning facilities, classrooms that we mentioned are not used in the evening. Is there an actual developed night school program in Portland? And if not, or if there are, those are the community colleges, we maybe don't want to take away their bread and butter, but these classrooms, if they're not used after 5, this could be a great opportunity to get high school kids or people who need to finish their GED and then also get people from the periphery that need to finish this, or they need to get night school in, and they need classes between 6 and 11 or midnight or like that. Buildings are here, they're not being used. Is there that exist in Portland State?
So just to repeat the question is, use the facilities after, after 5 PM, is there opportunity to bring in community college or high schoolers who are finishing their GED to sort of into the kind of night school situation in that. Just to kind of on that briefly, we have strong connections. Obviously, community colleges generally are third-year students are a third-year class is the largest class at PSU, right? Transfer students that come in. And there are connections with high schools and that, but we don't have our campus open necessarily to others, right? For that. So that's a certainly legitimate idea to say, is there opportunity here to invite others in to use this space that's not as a community resource.
Under the PSU umbrella.
Yeah,
PSU GED, PSU night school.
Right, generates some
Connection.
yeah, generate some credits and some revenue perhaps, and helps kind of build or helps solidify the model that is a downtown campus.
If I can,
Thoughts? Yeah,
if I can jump in, I think and I started with this. Let knowledge serve the city tends to be a one-directional understanding of it. We are bestowing our brilliance onto the city and making it better. I think we're missing a big opportunity. And again, I'm going to talk about East Portland that's underdeveloped, that needs development. And it could be a wonderful opportunity for young people and people of that community to actually create the spaces in which they live, right? So it would be pulling them to campus to do the work with the understanding that it's going to have a material outcome that they can see on the ground, that they can treasure, and they can belong not only in their neighborhood, but to the campus itself. When we say let knowledge serve the city, I'm getting the impression that it's really the downtown. And maybe we need to really think about those edges. Those places that need park planners, because East Portland needs parks, right? It needs sidewalks, it needs transportation. It needs all the stuff that we say we want in the city. They need it, and they were promised it when they were annexed into Portland. And it's been decades since they had it. I think it's a unique opportunity to really bring in the community to actually create itself. And it might be through certificate programs, it might be through GED, there might be a whole bunch of planners coming in, right? New way of visioning. That's an opportunity that we need to go out into the community and talk to folks. As I hear a lot of complaining, which is warranted, but we can actually offer an opportunity to change it or mitigate it. And why miss out on that by not having small satellites, doing online education, inviting community in so they can actually build the community that they want to see. So I think there's many negotiations or reconfigurations, and it doesn't necessarily have to be about property, but how do we create that belonging? How do we have PSU always in the community's mind? Because they know if there's something that's to be fixed, that they can turn to PSU because we are engaged, we are on the ground, we're willing to go out there and meet them where they are and build accordingly to their needs. So again, coming from urban studies and planning, this is so exciting to me to have that opportunity. And to your point, it might take 2 years for community members to warm up to us to say that, oh, wow, you're actually legit. You're not going away. You're actually here to stay. And those ties and those bonds and those relationships, they're so easily severed, but they take forever to build. And so slowly but surely, we can actually have a very interesting impact beyond the downtown area of Portland if we think about where our impacts could be, where they're really needed in Portland. So I'll leave it there.
Well, part of the problem, though, is that There are lots, I am sure, I can't name them off the top of my head. But over the years, I bet there's plenty of faculty and student projects that have taken place in East Portland. There's plenty of involvement. They're not, but as you say, it's diffuse. It's not a coalesced, crystallized, focused engagement, partnership, but it's there.
But I think like what Corbin's talking about is that consistency and like accountability. I think that those things will not just be like sporadically offered, or we do have a Center for Public Interest Design in the architecture school, which has been a presence and I think has a reputation in the city, but it's very contingent on faculty availability of time. And as Jeff says, there's this schism between what our expectations are as faculty and what our expectations are would be within a space like that. And I think to talk about this is also to talk about what our expectations are being brought from the administration on departments. And Jeff has just recently retired from being our chair. And, you know, a lot of the things like making connections to community colleges through our programming to have future architects and urban designers, you know, or to do projects, comes up a little bit against our expectations for revenue generation as a department and the rubrics on which we're being measured. And which is to say, again, it's not a solution, but there are some like institutional structural things that that kind of work against it. But I think being in this kind of space with, you know, people from multiple different schools and also from, you know, the university in general is a good step to try to think through those and what are things that are opportunities rather than necessarily existential crises, but rather it's just pointing us in a direction for the future.
I remember a conversation that's happened in the past and kind of an ongoing conversation, but how defined should the physical boundary of the campus be? And there's folks who, you know, you go to Harvard and you see the great gates of Harvard, and there's clear kind of delineation between what is the community and what is the campus. And there are folks that have advocated for that in the past, but I think the vast majority of people have said, no, let's keep the boundaries between campus and the city a little less distinct. And I think what I'm kind of hearing folks advocate for here, correct me if I'm wrong, is blurring those boundaries even more.
Blurring the boundaries.
You're like,
No, it's a great question, because it comes up all the time, right? And it's like, where's the boundary? So I can't tell when I'm on campus, not when I'm on campus, right? And what we need is more signage for that all the time too.
Or we need an ethical way of keeping these different jurisdictional, you know, connections kind of on the same wavelength, right? You know, you don't experience one part of the city in one way versus being on campus, you know. So is it really about signage, or is it about our understanding as residents and community members that the downtown space with Portland, with parks and everything like that, have a cohesive understanding about who can move through the space and when, versus it being sometimes a, you know, checker box of different jurisdictions that sometimes can be kind of a landmine if you don't understand where you are at a particular time, that can have sometimes grave outcomes for particular community members. So I'm not against blurring the line, but blurring it in a way that brings about more safety and connection and understanding and hopefully belonging to place.
seems like we have a question.
Okay, yeah, you could, please.
Albert?
Albert, you want to state your question, please?
I don't have a question, but I have
Unmuted.
got down comments. But I wrote Portland State has used community service to engage with the educational district. The purpose of the community service is to have students, staff, and deans collaborate with each other. Faculties provide office hours for students to attend. The campus has writing centers for students who need help with writing, and the campus also uses tutoring service to help students with their homework as when needed.
Can you repeat that, or at least summarize it? Sorry, we were having a little.
Portland State University has also used the community service to engage with the educational district. The purpose of community service is to have students, staff, and deans collaborate with each other. Faculties provide office hours for students to attend. The campus has writing centers for students. The campus has writing centers for students who need help with writing. The campus also uses tutoring services to help students with homework as when needed.
Yes, so the campus is a resource, for students, it sounds like. And how do, I guess perhaps the question, how do you reconcile that as the campus's resource with the campus, the mission of the university and this discussion that we've been having here? So thoughts on that?
Well, I think it suggests that there's an onus on us that if we are asking students to go to the expense and time of coming to a place that is maybe not even convenient for them to do that, that the kind of experience, the kind of resources that we provide, the kind of experience that they have when they've made that trip and gone to that expense should be worth that time and expense. But there should be something here, or there should be many things here that exceed what could be gained remotely.
Yeah.
And Liz is going to figure out what those things are.
Skate park. Yeah, I think like providing ownership of our campus spaces to students is super important. I don't think anyone gets excited to just come here and sit in a generic classroom when they can zoom in with them online. So I
We got that fixed, but apparently not. So.
I guess what I've been hearing repeatedly from students is that the value is in the experience on campus. And I think like the person who's speaking to us on Zoom is saying, like, what services are we providing to students who make the trip here? Something that I heard about this year is the basic needs hub on campus, which just popped up at Smith this past year, and we're going to help them with a map actually showcasing different resources for students who may have needs for food or just other basic things that aren't being met as a student. So I think things like that are really important. A lot of our cultural resource centers that provide a sense of belonging are super important.
Food pantry.
Yeah, the food pantry.
childcare.
And then just the ability to feel like you belong in a space. I was also gonna say I think we have a cool opportunity right now with identifying all of these gaps in downtown and on campus. There's a lot of complaints, and I think Anna said like existential crises happening. And I think that gives us a really good opportunity to rebuild things in a way that are meaningful to students who want to be here and engage with campus. And I think if everything was running perfectly, like, where is that opportunity? Like, there tends to be almost an attraction sometimes to blighted spaces or places that can be reinvented in a way that's better and that serves the community better. And I think we have that opportunity right now. We just need to actually do the work to really engage with students and harness that, and not do it in a way that's rushed or top down or doesn't meet the needs of students.
Yeah, and it seems like we haven't mentioned at all, but like, the projects that several people here are really involved in, which is the Vernier Science Center, which has been reimagined, into something that is a hub for BIPOC students going into science, for Indigenous studies, for a different view of what environmental research can look like, how that has spilled over into the public realm through the Oak Savannah project and started to connect these different spaces. And then the new art and design building, which, intersects with Layla's research in material studies and like this place as a literal material confluence. And I think that those are things that I think are individually being imagined as with very different methodology compared to, I don't know, very different, but I would say somewhat different methods and a different set of people at the table talking. But right now, that seems like those are still focused on individual buildings, and then there's sort of fallout from like the catch area from those, rather than and it has not yet gone as far as looking at the whole city, looking at those similar kind of conversations that could happen at a broader scale or even just at a whole campus scale. But there are some very interesting and exciting, I think, things happening there that are trying to make different types of places.
We've got some pretty awesome tools here on campus too, that just can't be kind of easily replicated, outside of kind of this setting. So, wind tunnels, giant, lit plasma cutting laser cutters, digital looms. These are things that you don't kind of operate in your parents' living room at home. And not only that, they're kind of exciting, and they're tools that can be used for good, in really interesting ways. And so I think that as a place for kind of wondrous tools, PSU has a role in that.
A makerspace.
Yeah, well, we've got some really fabulous maker spaces. They could be even more fabulous, but we've got some fabulous maker spaces. And oftentimes those maker spaces are deeply intertwined within the pedagogy of a particular discipline. And I begin to wonder what would happen if those same maker spaces became available to people coming from other disciplines. What would they do with those same tools? So we're a little protective maybe of our tools, and maybe we can be a little less protective of our tools, and that maybe even goes beyond not only other disciplines on the campus, but other parts of the community coming into play with those tools as well.
Well, I want to maybe circle back to a conversation we had a couple of years ago when we were talking about the Urban Design Collaborative. And I was pushing the idea of an umbrella being creative placemaking. And I really do think that BSU as a place, the university district could become a hub for creative placemaking broadly defined.
Yeah.
Yeah, question.
Are there elementary or high school or junior high school field trips to PSU for any reason?
We're losing one person. I just wanted to ask this member of the audience, could you identify yourself?
Yes, I'm Mark Roosevelt, and new trustee of the university.
Oh,
Fantastic.
thank you
Thanks
for
for
coming.
So question just about is the field trips to the university and the introduction from high school students, elementary students coming to here. And yes, I mean, there's numerous, and I think there are programs on campus, a few that I know about that are supporting particularly students who might not otherwise go to college, right? And so getting them into college experience, understanding what that's like to be on a campus and how they can then visualize themselves on that next step. So,
And that's one thing the new Vernier Science Center is actually going to have a hub. It's going to kind of consolidate what used to be called LSAM, which is like a science and technology focused high school, like especially for BIPOC high school students in the area to kind of get exposure and mentorship. But that is going to be reimagined and combined with some other programming into sort of like a more consolidated place on campus where high school students can come and then actually get internships. And so there's sort of an effort to make that more, I guess, like less of a hidden, invisible thing on campus and something that actually has a supportive presence.
Well, and I think actually, Dean Adler, you had an idea that maybe one outcome of these conversations might be that some aspect of this building could be used as a meeting place for city and campus, people concerned with the future city and the campus.
yeah, so PSU is a convening space, and sort of back to that question about how we engage. who we engage with, how do we choose to spend our resources and our time, I think is an ongoing question that we're gonna continue to need to answer as we move forward and define what PSU is going to be in the future and what is its place in the city broadly defined. So I think with that, we'll call an end. I want to thank all the panelists for great thoughts and discussion and all your time for preparing for this presentation. So thank you so much.
And I would also like to say thank you to panel members, to moderator. Very stimulating discussion, lots of really interesting ideas. Invite you to, as Jason has already pointed out, the next one in this series, which will be Monday, November 7, 4 o'clock, same time, same place. Housing in neighborhoods, past, present, and future. Yeah. Thank you all very much for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, George.